Hello, agency consultant Karl Sakas here, and welcome to Agency Office Hours for March 2021. We'll be answering questions about running your agency and growing more profitably. We have 4 questions coming up today. Here's a preview of the questions we'll be answering. Jorge in Southern California has a question about value-based pricing. Stephanie has a question about delegating to virtual assistants from North Carolina. Shadi in Spain has a question about creating documentation while simultaneously running the agency. And finally, Stefano in New Zealand has a question about building a marketing portfolio when past client work was under NDA. What can you do? We'll have some ideas there. If I mention your question, be ready to join. As a reminder, we will be recording today, so don't share anything out loud. You don't want to become public later. And if you are watching live, you'll get a copy of the video within 24 hours. If you're watching or listening on YouTube or elsewhere, please subscribe to make sure you get updates as soon as future episodes, future shows are available. If you're listening live, please introduce yourself in chat, where you're from, where your agency is, what your agency is, and what you're looking forward to about the coming month. All right, well, first up is Jorge. Jorge, if you want to unmute yourself, and I see you're on camera there already. Let me go ahead and get set up here, and we'll answer your question.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm so appreciative of your time and everybody's time as well. My question is, everybody in this pandemic has in one way or another been affected. And, back in March, in literally a week, we lost 40% of our business, and in 2 weeks, 70% of our business. Luckily, we've been able to stay open, and we've been transforming ourselves. We originally or historically have been in the realm of marketing and branding, but mostly just letting the client to tell us what to do, basically. So what we want to do is, and what we've been trying to do, is to pivot from that, tell us what you want, to we tell you what you need, so we can transform your business and grow it for you. Or at least be integral part of that growth of your business. Now, we have been researching a lot how to switch from that to be able to charge monetarily, but also to show the value of something like that, because we're so used to that hourly rate kind of thing.
Yes.
So we basically just sell our time. We don't want to sell our time anymore. We want to sell our expertise and our talent. And we don't. I mean, we've seen this point system and these other different things. And for us, the point system is basically this. After a lot of research, is basically the same as hourly.
Correct.
in a way.
Yes.
So it's how do we bring that and show it as value, so we can actually pivot for clients.
Let's dig into that. So 2 things to consider: 1, pricing model, and 2, positioning as a strategy-first agency. So first, let's consider pricing model. There are 3 agency pricing models: hourly, milestone, and value-based. Hourly is you're charging hourly rate or rates. Deliverable, milestone, you're charging on a deliverable basis, whether project or retainer. And then value-based, you're charging for the value of what you're delivering, whether through a combination of a commission or a royalty, and potentially some other factors, tying your fee to the results the client gets. It is worth considering that you can do strategy work under any of those models. Certainly value-based is the most lucrative if you're going to do strategy-related work, but strategy can work on a deliverable or milestone basis as well, and it can work hourly too. So it is worth considering that you can do value-oriented work, whether, regardless of pricing model, as you're doing more strategy work. The second thing is around positioning as a strategy-first agency. So in my think, teach, do model for agency services, there are 3 types of agency services. And for everyone listening, Jorge, and for everyone listening, think about where each of your services fit into these 3. So the 3, think, teach, do. Think is about strategy. That's where your client is saying, I don't know what to do, tell me what to do. Teach is about training and empowerment, where your client is saying, I want to do it myself, show me how. And then do, under think, teach, do, is about implementation. That's where your client's saying, do it for me. And if you're listening and you're like, we've been doing a lot of do, a lot of implementation work, clients are just like, just get this done for me. That's pretty common. It's easy to do that because clients come to you with, we want this, and you can decide, do you do that? It's a relatively easy sale. The problem, of course, that Jorge, as I imagine you've run into, is that it's somewhat commoditized, right? Someone's like, we want a website, these other people are charging 50% less, match their price. Or we want this many blog posts a month, how much will you charge for that? So the advantage of switching to more of a strategy first positioning, and Kat has shared the article for that if you're joining live on chat, is that ultimately you're not leading the conversation with, oh, well, this is how much a such and such is. You start by saying, well, wait, what do you need? What is the business problem you're trying to solve? Let's create a strategy to help you solve that problem. And then in that case, the implementation work is almost an easy sell because you're the one who recommended the strategy. Does that overall framing make sense, Jorge?
Yes, it does. Yes, it
Now,
does.
it is a challenge to reposition a strategy first with an existing client that sees you as a doer. So as you think about what to do next, you do want to consider that it's going to be easier for newer clients than it is for existing clients. For instance, as an agency PM, I once had a client ask for advice on what to do. Normally, our strategist or one of our strategists would answer that question. She was unavailable for a couple of days, so I said, well, I can answer that, and I walked through what to do. And he was like, oh, I'm surprised you knew how to do that. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, because I did that in previous roles. I was focused on PM at that particular agency, but I had done strategy work before. He sort of had pigeonholed me in one particular area. So your existing clients may not fully come along. But if you read the article about repositioning as a strategy first agency, and I think it's 14 not so easy steps, it's a lot easier to do that with new clients. So I would start, and this is for you, Jorge, and for everyone else who's listening, if you want to make that pivot, review the work you've done before and identify the strategic components, the think activities that you've done with existing clients. Odds are you have done strategy work already. You may not have fully billed for it, but it's there. And look at turning those into case study examples where maybe the case study highlights the strategy work, and even if the implementation work may have been a core focus, you can still highlight the strategy portion. Do you have some examples, Jorge, that are coming to mind that you could feature?
Actually, yes. And as we've done marketing strategies before, what we normally do is we actually come up with a whole plan, but we just let the client kind of like pick and choose. Like, oh, I don't want to do this, let's do that. Kind of like a la carte kind of thing. And
Right.
then we have to modify what we've already recommended.
Yes.
Whether it is because it is a budget issue or because the client doesn't believe in email marketing, for example, or things like that. So he says, oh, I don't want to do email. Those end up in the spam folder anyway. So we just have to modify, and it ends up being a la carte strategy.
Got it. And sometimes it is okay to do an a la carte strategy if you've got an opening in the schedule and that's suitable to their situation. You can always consider that. But I'd recommend repositioning toward the strategy first angle. And if clients aren't willing to follow your strategy advice, you have to decide, do you want to keep working with them? Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't, but now it's an intentional choice. One other thing before we move on to Stephanie's question about virtual assistants, the other thing to consider around pricing, you can accomplish higher pricing by charging for strategy work without jumping all the way to value-based pricing. You can still deliver some of that under the hourly model. Ideally, you switch more to the deliverable-based milestone model where you're charging, for the potential impact rather than how many hours it takes. But you also want to make sure that you know how much time it's going to take, because you don't want to find that you assumed it would be 10, it actually was 50, and it was a fixed price situation. Does that help?
Oh man, tons. Thank you so
Awesome,
much.
awesome. Well, good luck, and please email me, let me know how it all goes.
Definitely, thank you.
Thanks, Jorge. Well, next up is Stephanie. Stephanie, I see you are on video. Feel free to unmute yourself and, let's dive in. So Stephanie, your question was around virtual assistants. And, it's funny, I was planning to cover the VA topic this month anyway, because in my recent agency growth bootcamp, virtual assistants kept coming up over and over again. And so excited to answer your live question. To paraphrase, Stephanie, you asked, what can I delegate to a virtual assistant, and should I hire more than one VA? If you could, please introduce yourself and elaborate on your question.
Hi guys, I am Stephanie Hudson. I have a marketing agency. We focus primarily on branding and web development, and I also have over the past almost 2 years now, sort of broken off into another company as well, where we offer white label services to agencies. So they're the same but different, and it's becoming a bit overwhelming. As both businesses grow, I'm becoming completely buried, and I'm doing too much myself. So, and I'm finding that I want to do more of the white label side of things and helping agency owners and things like that. And so the web development projects are starting to be more of a burden. And so what I feel like I need is somebody, I don't really even know what to call it. I mean, at this point, everybody's sort of virtual. If I'm going to hire an assistant, they're going to be virtual. So,
by definition,
when you think VA, it carries a certain thinking of what kind of roles those would be. But now there's OBM is another thing. Project manager is a thing. I'm not sure what exactly I want. I want to have somebody who is somewhat of a traditional VA role that's helping me manage my inbox, handling to-do lists, and delegating things for me to other team members. But I'm trying to find that right match. How many do I want somebody that's technical, or somebody that's creative, or somebody that understands the industry, or do I just need somebody that's administrative? I'm having a hard time figuring out who it is. Basically, what is my job description? What's the best way to sort of approach this? And I know you can't answer that question specifically, but how do I?
We can talk through ways to think about it and to help you decide. Well, great questions. And I bet a lot of other people listening live or on the recording are wondering about that too. So here's some ways to think about that. When it comes to virtual assistants, there is a continuum. Some VAs are focused solely on administrative work, calendar management, booking travel, things like that, helping you stay organized. Other VAs tend to have...
sorry, what travel? What is this travel you speak of, Carl?
I hear it's a thing, yeah. So the idea is, some people may be fully admin oriented. Other VAs may have other skill sets, for instance, marketing related skill sets. So for instance, on my team, Kat, who's also the producer today, officially her title is executive assistant and marketing coordinator. But she is virtual, right? And, in a sense, could be considered a virtual assistant. In fact, she has been primarily has been a dedicated VA before. Kat, let me bring you into the video feed as well. Hi, Kat.
Hello.
Stephanie, one of the things to think about would be on that continuum, do you need someone, for instance, who's 80% administrative and 20% marketing, or maybe the other way? Maybe it's 80% marketing, 20% admin. What's your initial answer to that? And then Kat, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you'd think about this.
My initial thought is I'm happy to have somebody to train. They don't necessarily have to have the full skill set, but to have somebody that understands the industry in general, I think even with administrative tasks, you know, we've got a design team, we have a development team, a copywriting team. When a project comes in, to be able to have somebody that can, I could say like, okay, get this bit over to team A, to team B, you know, whatever. If they don't understand marketing at all, or you know, not used to the industry, the lingo, the processes, all of those things, I think are going to be a much harder learning curve.
Absolutely. And I think one of the questions to consider would be, do you need someone who's all administrative and then another person who's all marketing?
That is
And that's
another
going to depend on
question.
it's going to depend on the person. Kat, what are your thoughts?
Sure. So both, you know, in my experiences working as a VA and working with, you know, alongside other VAs, a lot of virtual assistants do have a generalist admin background. So, you know, you could certainly find one person who is very familiar with marketing, who specializes in marketing, but is also an administrative generalist versus hiring two people.
And all things considered, certainly, Stephanie, if you can find one person who can do it all, that's a lot easier from a communications perspective, right? You're not having to communicate to two different people and decide, do I send this to this person or I send that to that person? You know, the cognitive overhead is lower because you're not having to decide up front. The challenge,
Right.
of course, is that not everyone has developed both skill sets, and also not everyone wants to do both. You know, many marketing hires are like, you know, admin work may feel admin work is below them. That might be somewhat short-sighted, given that if you can't ship the work you're doing, it doesn't really matter very much.
Right.
But, you know, what's your reaction, Stephanie, to that?
Well, I've put so much thought into all of this. It's been like torturing me for the past, probably about the
Oh,
past
no.
year. And I have maybe a year and a half. I really have got myself into a bit of a quagmire because it's been too long. It's been needed for too long. And I have tried some VAs and it
Okay.
just hasn't clicked yet. And I feel like maybe you know, some were a little bit too admin strong and not enough industry understanding. And then there was one that was very knowledgeable of the industry. She was already sort of starting her own business. And then I said, well, this, maybe you can work with me a little bit. You can learn from me. You can
Right.
help me, you know, like it's a win-win. And that lasted exactly 5 weeks. And then when her kids got sent home for virtual only learning, she only had time to run her business, which is always, of course, going to be her priority. So, you know, I've had a conversation with another colleague who is a copywriter and has her own business. And she was lamenting a similar issue and said, I need to find another me. And my response was, that's how we all sort of feel, is we want somebody that will take the bull by the horns and go figure stuff out and just handle it. But I said, but if you find another you, they're running their own business. Like, because that's what we are, is business owners and entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So it's such a tough thing. It's like our entrepreneur brains can't understand people who just take direction. You know, it's like, how do you find somebody that can do what you need them to do? Like, that can check a list, but also like think for themselves and make decisions. So I don't know if any of this is answering the question that you asked me, but these are just all the things swirling in my head about like who that person actually is. And I feel like maybe as I'm hearing myself say it, maybe because I'm expecting a lot, maybe it is more of an OBM role or a project manager role, something like that, rather than a traditional virtual assistant.
Potentially, you know, thinking about the idea of, you know, the business manager, it is worth considering. You're touching on a key point, which is you don't want just an order taker. I mean, there is value to hiring a VA on a project basis if you need a particular set of research, for instance, where you're like, here's what I need, here are the specifications, please go do it. In that case, posting a project on Upwork makes sense. But I found it's really important to have team members who are, you know, rather than just taking the orders, are thinking for themselves, are pushing back. The phrase for that is intelligent disobedience. Right? If you ask for something and it's a stupid idea, you want your team member to say, well, wait a minute, based on your goals, I don't know if that's the best way to get there, kind of thing. And not everyone wants to be making all of the decisions. I received a coaching application from a client or a prospective client recently who said that her goal is to love her job every day, all the time. I love my work.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. I don't love it every single moment. So like that's, I think, a somewhat unreasonable expectation. But it is worth considering, as we're running our businesses, we have given up a guaranteed paycheck, although ideally, hopefully your agency is paying yourself on an ongoing basis, in exchange for the unlimited upside and the freedom and flexibility. Of course, that doesn't always work out as people expect, but it is worth considering that there are people who are your potential employees or potential VAs as contractors who don't want to be making the final decisions about everything. And maybe, Kat, is there anything you'd add on that from a mindset perspective before we wrap up this segment?
I mean, it pays to have somebody who can, like Karl noted, maybe mention when an idea you have may not align with a goal you have mentioned. I agree with you. I think a lot of folks who are, entrepreneurial minded and who are business owners have a hard time understanding how folks can be delegated to. So, it's definitely a precarious balancing act.
Stephanie, any follow? Sorry, go ahead.
Just one follow-up thing is, as I'm refining this and starting to decide who I want, do you guys have suggestions for where to look? I'm in a lot of Facebook groups. I think I've found that to be a huge wealth of relationships and networking. I'm not particularly interested in like an Upwork kind of thing where I'm tied to that company, because I want it to be somebody who can grow with me and eventually become a full-time employee or something like that. So what are places that you guys, there's all of these other sites for Venezuela and all that stuff too, where, you pay $500 and then you can hire somebody for $2 an hour or something. And I don't know, that just seems.
People who pay, $2 or $3 an hour because they may be hiring someone in a developing country. It is cheap per hour, and depending on the price and their cost of living, that may be quite a good deal for them, sort of a win-win. But you may not always be happy with the result. And also, if it's a situation where there's, unrest or, power continuity problems or things like that, like you could have a great person, but, there's a power outage for a week or something like that. That could be a challenge.
Time zones are another thing.
Yes. And you've already thought ahead to one of the key decisions, which is, do you do a direct hire for a VA, or do you hire them through a VA agency or another service? For instance, many of my clients have had a good experience working with Don't Panic Management, VA service, strong vetting process, things like that. I've, connected with Jess, the owner of Don't Panic, 5 years ago. The challenge, of course, is that you're paying for the overhead for a VA service. So, if you do a direct hire, they're going to be less expensive per hour, but you have to go through the pain of finding and vetting the right person. Mm-hmm. So, pros and cons on that. I do think, Stephanie, you're thinking about the right things. Let us know how it goes. And for anyone else listening on chat on the live event, feel free to share in chat what you found to be helpful as you're recruiting and managing VAs, virtual assistants, in your agency.
Please do. Thanks, Karl.
Stephanie, thank you for joining. All right. Coming up in just a moment, we will be answering questions from Shadi and then Stefano. So if you want to stand by and be ready to join. But before that, a word from our sponsor, me, Sakas & Company, helping you grow your agency profitably. We have a bonus tip from Sakas & Company to help you drive your agency forward. It's about the power of committing to your goals to someone else. Don't just set a goal, tell someone else that you have set that goal. Whether you're telling a coach, telling one of your colleagues, telling someone else. Potentially, if you're in a romantic relationship, telling your spouse, partner, they may be tired of hearing about your agency, but perhaps you can at least make a commitment to what you're trying to get done. In my work with coaching, I help agency owners in 3 ways: advice, sounding board, and accountability. And people usually reach out for the advice. They're like, I have these scenarios, what do I do? Or how do I meet my long-term goals? But eventually I find they love the accountability, helping them get things done faster than on their own. There's something about knowing that I'm going to ask them in the next monthly call about how their goals went and how they're going. A few years ago, one of my clients was on a podcast. She was interviewed on the podcast, and she talked about doing coaching. And one of her comments, as I was listening to the podcast, she said, the moment I miss a goal, Karl is like, where is it? What happened? When are you going to get it done? I did clarify to her afterwards that I don't follow each client's individual goals that closely, not like the moment they might miss a deadline, I'm like, where is it? But I was glad that she thought that I did. There we go. If you would like advice, accountability, and a sounding board to help you grow your agency more profitably this year and beyond, I invite you to apply to my executive coaching program. It's exclusive to agency owners and leaders. And as one client noted, he accomplished more in the first month of coaching than in a decade on his own. And now back to Q&A. And Kat, by the way, has shared a link to learn more and apply. If you're interested, no obligation. All right, well, next up, Shadi in Spain has a question about standard operating procedures. Shadi, bringing you on, I see you're on video, you're unmuted. To paraphrase your question, Shadi, you asked, how can we create standard operating procedures, SOPs, agency procedure documents, while simultaneously running and growing the agency? It's a tough challenge. Could you introduce yourself and elaborate a bit on what you're running into, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the founder of Progressives.io. I've been running the agency for 6 to 7 years. We focus primarily on WooCommerce developments. It's typically custom development for e-commerce shops, lots of plugin and website development. The team has been growing, so we're around 5 or so, and then some remote developers. Yeah, the challenge is always, everything, a lot of things are in my head, given the fact that I've been doing it for 7 years, and
not uncommon.
Sorry, not
uncommon. It's a very, very common situation.
And it's this challenge of how do you, first of all, identify which things need to be documented and at what point, and then how much time do you dedicate to it, and how do you actually approach it versus just giving the answer to the individual who runs into the problem as it happens. And it might, make sense in some scenarios, just be like, oh, just do it this way next time, versus let me document it for an hour and then it's never used again. So it's that challenge of how to approach it, how to know what's in your head is worth documenting. And I'm sure it has to do with the repeatability of these things. But again, it's not always easy to sort of identify. I guess that's the challenge. And I keep saying I'm going to document, but it sort of doesn't always happen. And so I don't know if it's due to a certain size, that you need to be a certain size. Let's say maybe when you're 10 people, it's worth it. Or maybe you should get someone else to do it and just dedicate them. There's a lot of questions I'm not 100% sure of how to approach in terms of standard operating procedures.
Here are some ways to think about that. One, when it comes to what to document, I would consider a couple categories. I would consider things that are highly recurring, things that keep happening over and over again. Probably makes sense to document them because then you can delegate them to someone else. So you're not having to do it. Or if someone else is doing it and they leave, they win the lottery or what have you, you're not wondering, well, how did they do that? So highly recurring activities are a definite thing to document. The other thing to consider would be things that may be more infrequent. Maybe it's something you do once a year, but that are highly complicated to the point that you're not going to remember how to do it but maybe they're really important. Maybe there's some sort of a year-end update that you need to do for certain clients. Maybe it's something related to gathering tax documents for your corporate tax return, that kind of thing. Where you're not doing it all the time, but it's so infrequent, but also important. Want to pay your taxes, that it helps to have the documentation. So that's one way to think about it. Now, the question of when to document, and this is true for you, Shadi, and for everyone who's listening, have a place to track the documentation. Now, some people will use a knowledge base. Other agencies will use, a series of Google Docs, right? A folder and subfolders for different documentation. A key thing is you want a place to track it. So if you don't have a place to track it and you think of something to document and you want to document it, you don't have a place to put it. So figure out what's right for you, whether it's a formal intranet or knowledge base, or it's just, a bunch of Google Docs kind of thing. And if people have favorite ways of tracking your SOPs, if you're listening live, please share on chat what your favorites are. So, as a starting point, Shadi, does that make sense around focus on documenting the super recurring tasks and the really infrequent but really complicated, and then, or as a starting point, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess follow-up is how much time do you think is worth dedicating, and it's tricky. I know it's case by case, but
yes. So in terms of how much time, I mean, even with your current team size of 5+ contractors, the contractors, of course, add complexity to the agency. Imagine if you were spending across the whole agency, and you as in total staff hours, say 5 hours a week on documentation. Ideally, maybe 10, but let's say it's just 5 staff hours. And that includes if you have a 1-hour meeting with 2 people, that's 2 staff hours out of the 5. That's not an enormous amount of time over the week, right? That's averaging 1 hour a week for the core team, plus even less when you include the contractors. But that 5 hours a week, when you multiply it out over the whole work year, we're talking more than a couple hundred hours on documentation. That is plenty of time to document things. So I'd recommend dedicating it that way, and maybe, depending on how you want to structure it, maybe the assumption is most people are doing something to document each week, or maybe you say, you know what, your job so-and-so is to spend 4 hours this week, and then we'll review it at the end of the week on how it went. So it's only taking 1 hour of your time, kind of thing. Or maybe they'd spend technically 3 hours, and then you spend an hour together to get to the 5-hour total. That way, it's not falling onto every single person every single week, and it's also not falling onto you. You may want to do some initial strategy work to decide how you're going to split up the work and what you're going to prioritize. In general, whenever you're in the midst of doing a task, that is the best time to document it, because you're thinking about it, you're thinking about the pieces, you can grab screenshots as needed, you can double check, what is this field labeled as, rather than guessing what you think it is. So that is an ideal time to gather and create the documentation, but make sure you pad the timeline, you pad the schedule on that, because it is always going to be longer and more time consuming to document something than to just do it the first time. But if you document it, it's going to be a lot easier than re-explaining it every time. So do you have any, for instance, major things coming up, whether it's a site launch or a site kickoff coming up, that you could use as an opportunity to document things?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of couple new projects for sure. And I guess it's tricky because some of this could be purely because we have a new hire, and it might be that they specifically need some more hand-holding, and maybe it's not worth documenting. So that's always the challenge of I mean, I'm sure it's also worth creating documentation for new hires, but versus, I don't know, it's just the prioritization, I guess.
I have a delegation opportunity for you, which is you've got the new hire, make them in charge of creating their own documentation. You know, so as you or someone else explain things, part of their job is to record the training, you know, as you go. And you probably want to review it to make sure they understood it the way you intended it. But that way you're not having to track it. And for everyone who's listening, if you're onboarding a new team member, use this as an opportunity for them to take the lead on the documentation, review the work. If they don't work out, by the way, now you have documentation. Make sure they're creating it in their, you know, agency account, not their personal account. That could lead to some challenges later. You know, Shadi, before we move on to the next question from Stefano, what follow-up questions do you have about that?
I guess one follow-up question is in regards to sort of how much to document general things such as how you approach a problem, which is one issue sort of with a new hire who, let's say, initially spent hours researching things and didn't respect the fact that this is chargeable to the client and they need to think about how they spend their time wisely, which is sort of a general approach issue versus more of a project management automation type issue, which we do want to bring on sort of more standards within project management.
Right.
And maybe that takes off a lot of the standard operating procedures because we're just going to have it built within some sort of workflow within ClickUp or whatever system we use. And should we then just focus maybe on the project management, since that's obviously key to delivering projects, and then the general approach to problem, maybe again, the actual new hire starts documenting that, and then you sort of get both done. But it's the fact that I don't necessarily have time to do everything, as I'm sure as many others here know.
Indeed.
So
you'll have to find the right answer for you. I would say though, when you're thinking about how do you even approach thinking about solving a problem and documenting that would help solve a problem that a lot of agency owners run into, where they say, you know, I want someone else to handle strategy. Why am I always the one doing client strategy, but my team doesn't understand it? Well, okay. I mean, they're not going to understand it if you don't explain your thought process, if you don't explain the frameworks you use to organize things. You know, for instance, earlier I talked about the Think, Teach, Do framework, or about pricing, you know, hourly, milestone, and value-based. You know, if there are certain shortcuts you use, make sure your team knows about them. Then they can make better decisions on their own. So you'll have to decide how much of that to share, because some of the things you're making higher level strategy decisions on are based on years and years and years of experience. And you may not be able to delegate those as easily, but there may be some pieces you can around ways to approach thinking about things versus just specific procedures on how to get things done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I believe so.
Well, Shadi, thank you for joining. Stefano, you will be up next in just one moment. We've gotten some great questions on chat. If you're watching the video, you're missing out on the live chat experience. So let's see, Beth, thank you for your notes. You know, you can make part of company culture to ask questions if unsure, rather than just, you know, just wondering. You know, certainly, you know, if it's moderately and fairly complex, you could make project templates in Basecamp or your other PM system. And certainly, you know, have the new people start documenting things, whether that's as you said, Bet, hit by the bus insurance. I had a boss who liked to say, you know, if you get hit by the bread truck, I can't look at a bread truck without thinking of Mike's comment, even many years later. Or I had a boss who liked to describe it as winning the lottery. She's like, in that case, no one, you know, is injured or worse, kind of thing. You know, and you know, that also could be a case, Bet, as you noted, where maybe you've summarized the process and then you have a team member write it up. That's a good opportunity if you say maybe you prefer to do an audio version or do a video version. You could record yourself walking through it, maybe even doing a Loom video, and then potentially getting that transcribed, whether through rev.com or through someone else. You don't have to sit down and write down everything if that's not what you want to do. And if it is what you want to do, well, then definitely go do it. There we go. Next up, question-wise, and indeed the suggestion that otter.io, I've heard good things on that for transcriptions as well. All right, next up for Q&A, Stefano, thank you for joining us from Auckland, New Zealand. I appreciate your joining so early this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to meet everyone. I'm Steph. My partner and I started the Odd Wave towards the end of 2019, and we have since been in partnership with a leading digital marketing agency where we help them out with all their e-commerce website design, development, integration work on Shopify, Magento, WooCommerce, and all the other like big platforms, as well as custom developments. But all of the above under strict NDA. So the
Steph, by the way, heads up, your volume is coming in somewhat low. I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can adjust anything, but let's see. Perfect. That seemed to help. So to paraphrase your question, Steph, you asked.
Okay, so the main challenges and the sorry. Okay.
To paraphrase your question is this: how can an agency build a marketing portfolio if most of the past work has been under non-disclosure agreement, under NDA, on a white label basis? What can you do if you can't talk about the work you've done? So if you could elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, so the main challenges under NDA is we cannot showcase any client work. We cannot get any client testimonials or reviews. And also getting official expert status from some of our technology partners has become a very big challenge because they want to see client portfolio work. And we do realize that testimonials and client portfolios are very important to acquiring new business. And so we would really appreciate any advice on how best to acquire new business given past client work under strict NDA.
Glad to help. And, disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. So with that in mind, moving forward, I would start by asking your agency partner, the one that's been the intermediary for the client work, if they are open to relaxing portions of the NDA. They may not want to say, sure, go publish everything, under your name, because they want to keep the client work associated with them. They might consider two particular things. One, maybe you could say, what if we don't publish it publicly, but we put it in some sort of a password protected or one-on-one only in sales conversations kind of basis? So it's not Googleable. No one else is going to find it unless they have the password. You can double check that the people you're talking to aren't, direct competitors or things like that kind of thing. They may be open to that. Some of my clients have had good luck with that, where they're saying, we're not publishing it to the world. We're just sharing it one-on-one with a particular sales prospect. That's one angle to consider. They may not want to do that, but it's worth considering. The other angle to consider would be, would the intermediary agency give you permission to share work directly with the technology partners for certification and qualification purposes? So, even if they don't want to let you share it publicly or, even sort of one-on-one semi-publicly, maybe they'd be willing to say, yes, this firm did the work, and was the one behind that. Now, they don't have to let you do that, but that is different from publicly publishing things. With this particular partner, what do you think their reaction might be to those proposals? The share with the technology partners for certification and or have some sort of a locked down version of sharing?
We recently approached them about all of the above, and they were basically very strict in saying that, no, we're not allowed disclosing anything, in terms of any confidential information. So, yeah.
And what was their rationale for that? Was that they're trying to lock down the work? their end clients are trying to lock it down, or was it more like they were like, this is just the way it is? Do you have a sense of what their core motivation was?
No, so we work through a project manager on their side, and they kind of relay information from their seniors, and that was basically the message. We haven't yet tried approaching them for kind of like trying to disclose the client work to their technology partners, and kind of like, you know, we haven't yet approached them with that kind of question, but I think that would be like a good suggestion. Yeah, maybe try and go back to them.
And before you reach out to them, I would go to the technology partners and ask them, you know, what are their norms? I'm sure you are not the first white label oriented agency to seek, you know, certification status with the technology partners. So it might be if you can get some intel and some insights from them about how this normally works, then you can use that to cite it as a best practice. You would say, we talked to so-and-so, and they have a recommended way of handling this that doesn't expose any of the work publicly. It's to do this, 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 and this. And they have done this, you know, 300 times, and it's never exposed anything publicly, you know, or something like that. That way you're using that to help persuade them. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, I will do that.
Awesome, awesome. You know, there's no guarantee, of course, that they're going to want to do that, but it's worth a try. And in that case, you're building some momentum by making it as easy as possible for them, rather than requiring them to figure out how to make it work. As a mentor once said to me, if you want someone to do something for you, do it for them.
Awesome.
Make it as easy as possible. The one other thing to think about would be, let's say you aren't able to persuade them to share. You're going to have to start building your portfolio from scratch. That's not an easy situation. It may be worth considering, are there anonymous case studies you could create about the potential work? So rather than saying, you know, we did a website for so-and-so, it's we did a website or we did a campaign or this or that for a company in the commercial real estate industry, or we did, you know, something in a direct-to-consumer health and wellness client, you know, or something like that, so that you're not revealing any confidential information, or at least identifiable information. You probably want to double check with your attorney to make sure that, you know, you're not going to get in trouble for that. But that may be an angle to consider if you can't get the intermediary agency to budge on anything.
Awesome.
So
thank you.
Yeah. So good luck as you're working through that. I mean, it's not a fun situation, and indeed, you know, for anyone listening, you know, that there are pros and cons of doing white labeling. It's tough if the partner you're working with doesn't want to let you reveal anything. So, you know, Steph, good luck as you are sorting through that.
Many thanks, and thanks for all your advice. Really helpful.
Absolutely. Appreciate your joining early in the day. Well, you know, as we wrap up our office hours today, I'm curious if any new questions have come up. We have time for a lightning round question. If you want to raise your hand or otherwise, you know, say hello in chat, we have time for one lightning round question. And I see, thank you, Cap, for the note in chat that if people want to save the chat, you can click in chat the ellipses ... to grab a copy of that. By the way, please keep an eye out in chat if you're joining live for my Sharp Spring Agency Industry Survey. This is the annual update to last year's survey that I did with Sharp Spring about the state of your agency. I'll be sharing results coming up in about a month and a half. If you take the survey, nothing is linked to your responses. It is totally separate. But if you opt in for the webinar at the end of the survey or after the survey, you can get a first note update on, you know, on the results when those come out. All right. Well, thank you. Let's see, Jorge, I see you have a follow-up question. If we can bring you on video and work through your question. So Jorge, if you want to unmute yourself, you asked, is there more to pivot our company in terms of rebranding and how to repackage your message? Jorge, if you could elaborate a bit on that.
Yes, definitely. So we are in different networking groups. We also are part of a mastermind group. And it's been difficult for us to really explain what we want to do so they understand that we don't want to be that a la carte agency that they've known us for and that we've strived for the past 10 years.
Yes.
For it's like when you're doing a rebranding, how you launch that new brand, that new logo, that new look,
right?
And so people can embrace that when you are pivoting, because again, what we want to do is to be part of that transformation and growth of our clients' business.
Yes.
How can that be accomplished in terms of the new messaging?
It is indeed a rebrand, as you noted. Where ultimately, you're taking what you used to do, and people might know you for one thing, and not anymore. Things are changing, right? And so with that in mind, you're going to want to come up with some new messaging, right? What is it you are doing to help people now, right? It's changed. If you were thinking about it, say people in networking groups or masterminds, how might they summarize what you do today? What do you think what would they say currently?
I think they see us as the boutique agency that creates ADA compliant websites and does branding and does graphic design collateral, like very specific things, the one that we that wants a brochure doesn't think that we can also do this other type of things. They're just thinking that we only can do the brochure, or the one that wants the website, they can't think that we can do the SEO strategy or the social media strategy or everything that goes into it to grow their website reach.
I would start by identifying some signature stories. So these would be stories where you tell about work you did for clients and importantly, the results they got. You can use the STAR framework. STAR is an acronym for situation, task, action, and result. It's used in interviews, right? If someone asks, interview question, tell me about a time when blah. Well, you give a situation, you say the task of what you did, the action you took, and then the result you got. So for instance, someone will say, well, Karl, what does your work involve? And I'm like, well, the goal is to help agencies grow profitably. That can happen in a few ways. For instance, a number of years ago, a client reached out, said, I want to sell my agency, but I have a problem. Last year, our revenue doubled, but our profit margins are down. I know the numbers are heading in the wrong direction. What do I do? Well, I helped her. I analyzed the situation. I made a series of recommendations. And 3 years later, she had a successful exit. That's an example. So for instance, if someone were thinking of selling their agency, well, that sounds appealing, right? Maybe it's something where someone was feeling overloaded. For instance, a client said, I have 2 kids, but I'm working, all the time. It feels like I can never get away. I've tried to hire new people. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Clients often want to work with me. What do I do? Well, did executive coaching. I helped him identify some shortcuts to help him make changes. He saw some initial results immediately. And in working together over 18 months, he ultimately was able to eliminate night and weekend work while also raising his prices. Think about signature stories like that you could tell that illustrate the services you want to do and that don't highlight the services you don't want to use. For instance, you know, in high school and college, I studied German. My German proficiency is not great. My pronunciation, I think, is still, I still remember that, but you know, so I don't have German in, you know, when I was applying to jobs in the past on my resume, because I don't want to be asked to use it, kind of thing. So think about signature stories, and I would start with that and then go from there. Does that make sense?
Completely, yes.
Awesome. And good luck, Jorge, as you sort through that. And also for everyone else who's listening, as you sort through all of your transitions. Well, that wraps up agency office hours for this month. If you're joining live, you'll get the video within 24 hours. If you're watching the recording, please hit subscribe to get notification about future events as soon as those go live. And if you have a question you want to ask at a future event, sign up at the Sakas and Company website, SAKASAND, the word company.com, for the free office hours. And you can ask your question. I'll let you know beforehand if we'll be answering your question. And sometimes, as you just saw, we can take ad hoc questions as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I appreciate your being part of the event today. If you'd like one-on-one help or exploring that, check out Executive Coaching. Thank you. And good luck out there. Karl Sakas here. See you next time.